Hi and welcome. My name is Lawrence Baker. I'm an Adobe certified expert in Photoshop CC and Photoshop Lightroom. This video is going to be about image sizing inside the export dialog box. Now, Lightroom doesn't give you a lot of feedback, especially if you're going out to print, let's say. You need to understand what PPI means. Now, I'm going to briefly mention PPI now because I'm going to mention it again as well later. PPI doesn't matter on the screen. It's a bit of information instructing a printer to print at a certain quality. And I'm going to prove to you in a minute that it doesn't matter if it's 1 PPI or 300 PPI on a screen. It makes no difference whatsoever. Now, there are many people out there who get it wrong. And I'm ashamed to say some of them are meant to be Photoshop experts, and they're not if they don't understand about PPI. I'm going to cover it in a minute in much more detail. Now, no discussion about image size can really take place without talking about cropping inside Lightroom. Lightroom is about aspect ratio when it comes to cropping. Now, it's a bit different in Photoshop, but inside Lightroom, you need to get the aspect ratio right. Now, if you're not bothered about the size you want on export and you're happy with the crop, it doesn't matter whatsoever. But if you want a certain size, you need to crop to that aspect ratio. Right, let's go to the crop tool, which is Tools, Crop, or R on my keyboard, or this symbol here. Now, I currently got a 16:9 aspect ratio. The padlock is locked, so I cannot break the dimensions or the aspect ratio. Now, that's a common size, and it's got 1920 by 1080 there. Now, if I was to accept that by going close now, and proving to you inside my develop view options that I've got crop dimensions showing up the top there, is it a 1920 by 1080 image? No, but it's still 16:9. You cannot break the aspect ratio of an image on export. That is really important to remember. Now, in the image size dialog box inside Photoshop, you can play around and distort the image. Why would you? I don't know, but you have that ability. Inside Lightroom, you cannot break the aspect ratio, so you should crop to the aspect ratio of the size you want. As I said, if you're not bothered about the size, and you're going out to Flickr or whatever, you're not bothered about the size, then, don't bother about the crop. If your eye likes the crop, that's fine. But if you want a certain size, you need to crop to that aspect ratio. I'll also show you, I pressed R on my keyboard there. If you can't work out the aspect ratio, the lowest divisible number, you can just put in the measurements as they are, like 1024 by 768, let's say. Go OK. It's a 4:3 aspect ratio. Lightroom has done the math for us. Now, if I command Z on that, or Control Z or Control Z, whatever you want to say, I've got it back. Now, if I wanted another one, let's say I wanted 12" by 16", 12" by 6", I should say, I can put it in just like that, and bang, I've got the aspect ratio right. So that's a quick way of doing it. Let Lightroom do the work. You can put it in pixels, inches, centimeters, as long as you've got the ratio in that you want, or the measurements in you want, Lightroom will do the rest for you. So let's assume I'm quite happy with that. Well, I'm quite happy with 12 by 6 there. So I know when I come to export this, I can have a 12" by 6" image. So let's just accept it by closing or pressing return on the keyboard. Now, let's go up to export this image. It's File, Export, which is Shift, Command, and Control E. Now, with the image here, resize to fit. Now, you don't have to tick this if you're not going to change the size. Now, let's say I wanted the best possible quality as a printed image. I would just leave 300 in here. Now, 300 PPI is considered the benchmark for quality for printing. Most print bureaus will insist, or not insist, but push you towards 300 PPI. They don't want you to be disappointed. Now, I could probably push this image in particular much lower than 300 PPI because I know there's not a great range of colors in the image and the tonality is not there. It's basically quite a dark image. So the histogram proves that. It's got clipped shadows and everything. But that is a skill you develop with time. And if you do a lot of printing and you use the same bureau, you'll take the risk sometimes and it will come back at 150 PPI and fine. So that's one way of resizing an image. But you can't see that on screen because if I half that size to 150, let's say, I don't even know what size image I'm going to get in the first place. But I can tell you, I know it's a 13" by 7" image thereabouts. So you can go to some online calculators that will do it for you, but it's something that Lightroom doesn't show you, and it's a little bit frustrating. I wish we had the feedback somehow, but we haven't. So you need to understand by going online and finding a PPI calculator. Unfortunately, PPI has two meanings, especially in the UK. So you might have to put pixels or pixel calculator in, and you'll be able to work out from that measurement there and 300 PPI or 150 PPI, what size image you're going to get. Now, this is not the normal way to resize an image. I would normally go like this: 300, resize to fit the inch size. Don't forget the aspect ratio has to be right. I cannot put any old measurements in here. The longest edge will be respected, and the second measurement will be the aspect ratio measurement, whatever that will be. So it's a bit hard to understand. Now, Photoshop is really good in this respect. If you use the image size dialog box, you can see what's happening on screen. Once you resize to fit here, you've got to have some feedback, and the only way you can get feedback is finding out what image you're going to get in the first place at 300 PPI. As I said, I know it's 13 inches by 7 inches, but you don't see that on screen. So you cannot put any measurement you like in. And if you're making it smaller, you'll be fine. But if you click don't enlarge, basically you cannot bust the 300 PPI rule. That means you cannot go above 13 inches by 7 inches. I'm going to show you inside Photoshop in a minute what this means, because the feedback is brilliant. But you think for a tool like Lightroom, it's aimed at what I call ordinary photographers as well, that this box would be a lot better. There should be a little bit of feedback. There isn't. If you untick don't enlarge, you can put any size you like in there. The trouble is, as I say, aspect ratio will be respected. The trouble is you will degrade the quality of the image, and you cannot see it on screen what you're going to get. Now inside Photoshop, you can see what's going to happen to the image on screen. So you get a rough idea what the print's going to look like. I mean, the ultimate arbiter is when you get that printed copy back and you're holding it in your hand, and then you can say, I've actually got a good print here, and I've spent quite a bit of money, I quite like it. But you can't really tell in advance what you're going to get inside this dialog box. Now, if you're going out to a high-end print bureau, I would recommend that you actually do the resizing inside Photoshop. Now, if you haven't got Photoshop, that's a bit unfortunate. Now, I have printed this particular image by untick resize to fit, put 300 in there, knowing that's the quality setting. I got my print back. I was very happy with it. Now, if I go to Photoshop with the same image, and then I go to the image size dialog box, image size, which is Alt or Option, Command or Control I. Now I can see at 300 PPI, it's a 13 inch by 7 inch image. Now I'll quickly show you the preferences in Lightroom, by the way, because I did obviously export this from Lightroom originally. And if you go under the preferences, under Lightroom and preferences, under external editing, these are the recommended settings: TIFF, ProPhoto RGB, 16 bits, resolution 300. Now the resolution I put in at 300 because that's what showed straight up in the image size dialog box. It doesn't really matter if you put 1 or 150 there or whatever, because PPI is a quality setting for a printer. It's nothing to do with what you see on the screen. I'm going to prove that to you in a minute, as I said. So that out of the way, back to Photoshop. So it's a 13 inch by 7 inch image. Now, just to show you what resolution does, if I put 150 there, notice I had to untick resample, because this is not the normal way of resizing an image. If I put 150 PPI in, I'm telling the printer, print at a lower quality. I've now got a 26 inch by 14 inch image. It's doubled in size. The normal way of doing things, though, it can be done that way. So you want to double the size of the image. But if you want more accurate measurements, I'll put 300 in there, tick resample, and then pick an interpolation method. That's the posh word for how it does the resizing. But if you don't know anything about that, just keep it on automatic, and it does a really good job. Tick resample, and then put your measurements in. Let's say I want 26 inch by 14 inch. And because it's an aspect ratio, I've got the chain symbol on there. It can't break the aspect ratio. I can untick it and break the aspect ratio. You can't do that inside Lightroom. That's important to remember. But why would you want to distort your image? But you don't get any feedback in Lightroom, and that's where the problem lies. So that's the normal way of resizing an image. Don't forget, making the image smaller also degrades the quality. Making it larger also degrades the quality. So let's make this 26" with doubling its size basically. And what resample is Photoshop doing the work for you. If you pull the pixels apart to make the image larger, Photoshop has got to infill them with other pixels, and it makes a decision about how it's going to fill it in by using these different methods. If you leave it on automatic, it'll do a good job. So, you know, it's called interpolation. It's quite a complex subject. You don't need to get into it. But basically, I'm now going to make it twice the size. There may be some degradation of quality, you know, there might be some loss of quality, but I actually don't think it's that bad. So the real way to resize an image is to let Lightroom or Photoshop do the work. You can play around with a PPI. And PPI is saying, well, I let the printer drop the quality. Now inside Photoshop, I can see the quality. Now, because I'm looking at the image in one-to-one view, so if I hand around it, it doesn't look that bad. So I could get away with doubling the size of this image, still keeping it at 300 PPI and not losing much quality. Now let's go back to Lightroom, because I want to put that myth about PPI to bed now. So let's go to export this, Command or Control Shift E. I'm going to export this image. I'm not going to play around with the size. I'm going to export it at 1 PPI and keep the size. It'll come out at that 3912 by 1956. Export it and view it in preview when I get it out of, or export it out of Lightroom. I've got it down there. Now preview is like a Windows photo viewer. I'm on a Mac. So let's go and do that now. I'll overwrite it. Up it comes on my screen. Sorry about the delay. I need to go to Tools, Show Inspector to prove to you it's a 1 pixels per inch. They use DPI here, and that is the relationship. PPI is only metadata telling a printer that I want you to print this image at 300 PPI. You used to be able to break the rules. I won't go into that now, but Photoshop have tied things down, or Adobe have tied things down, so you can't break the rules. So that is a 1 PPI image on my screen. If I go back to Lightroom, again, Command or Control Shift E, and put out as a 300 PPI image, export it, overwrite it, let it come up. There's no difference between the two whatsoever. So that's what PPI stands for. It's an instruction to a printer. Adobe won't allow you to break any rules like they might have done in the past. What I will say about Lightroom, because this is really about Lightroom, is if you just want the best quality, untick that and put 300 in there. If you know what you're doing, you can resize it and probably get away with quite a lot, but it doesn't give you any feedback, whereas Photoshop does. So it's a bit like the Wild West. And if you've got a bit of money to burn and you're using an online print bureau, you could probably get images back and think, oh, actually, that looks quite good at 150 PPI, or I've doubled the size or whatever. And it depends on the image, of course. But I would recommend you probably do it in Photoshop until Adobe actually give us some feedback. It is a bit like the Wild West. So I'm going to recap now. If you want a certain size, crop to that aspect ratio. And you can enter it in a custom box if you haven't got a preset for it. When it comes to image sizing here, you've got to understand you can't break the aspect ratio. 300 PPI is about printers. It's seen as the benchmark. You can drop that figure, but the normal way is to resize it to the size that you know you're going to get, and you don't know you're going to get a 13" by 7" image here. So there are online calculators, but I do recommend you take your image into Photoshop, even if you don't use Photoshop that much. And the other thing is, if you tick don't enlarge, then it won't go above whatever that's set. 300 there means it's a 13" by 7" image. If I tick that, I cannot go above or change the size above that size. So there's certain things you need to understand. Another thing I will talk about now before I close down is resolution. Resolution is also dependent on how far away you view something from. Now, a billboard is not printed at 300 PPI. Now in this high density screen world we're going into now with retina screens, etc., the reference pixels become important, and you can read about it, but you know, resolution is about distance you view things from. So you can get away with a hell of a lot. If this photograph wasn't designed to be seen really close up, I could probably drop it to 150 ppi, no problem, or double its size or whatever. And the recommended method is you play around these settings here. The same in Photoshop as well. You literally play around with these size settings here and let Photoshop do the resampling. I'm always just showing you the relationship between PPI and size. As I said, I drop it to 150, I can double the size of the image. That's not the normal way of doing things though. It's better to let Photoshop do the resampling for you. Especially in Photoshop, you can see the results on screen. I hope I haven't gone on too much, guys. This is not the easiest subject and it can be a bit boring, but Lightroom is not the best thing for image sizing. I will have to say that now. So if you read up a little bit about resolution and use online calculators to see what size of print image you're going to get in the first place. Now, if you're not worried about size or anything like that, just do your crops and export it, it'll be fine. If you're bothered about print size, you need to understand that PPI and aspect ratio is important. That's it, guys. Thanks very much.